Hi, this is the Reverend Dr. Nadine Rosechild-Sullivan coming to you tonight to read and to discuss with you another portion of my book, I Trusted You, Fully and Honestly Speaking of Gendered Assault. I'm giving a trigger warning because I am discussing sexual assault, and also it's important to note that a rape happens at about 750,000 women per year in the United States, somewhere above 700,000. And that also, on average, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are assaulted in some way sexually before puberty, so prepubescent. And also, I'm beginning on page 42 as I'm reading about the rapist. First, I'm starting with a quote by Christopher Kilmartin, who said, "Some still consider rape an act of male sexuality gone awry, rather than an act of violence. But we know differently. Just as we know that if a person hits another person over the head with a frying pan, we don't call that cooking." Section 3 of this chapter on page 42 is entitled The Rapist. Female perpetrators do commit a small, but nevertheless real percentage of the sexual assaults against children and adolescents. However, rape is highly correlated with gender, with males committing nearly 100% of forcible rapes, especially adult on adult. Therefore, whether through nature or nurture, the female perpetrator of rape is rare, with not all, but almost all sexual assault being committed by males. Using a quote here from Jackson Katz, Dr. Jackson Katz, K-A-T-Z, "What percentage of rape is committed by women? Question mark. Is it 10%, 5%? No, less than 1% of rape is committed by women. Let's state this another way. Over 99% of rape is perpetrated by men, whether the victims are female or male. Men are overwhelmingly the perpetrators. Along with being male, most often rapists are not strangers. While 20 to 22% of the time the rapist is unknown to the victim before the attack, 78 to 80% of the time, rapists do not represent stranger danger. Most rapists are known to their assailants before they attack. Also, generally speaking, rapists are not mentally ill and are unremarkable in appearance. Most rapists look normal, air quotes normal. Rapists do not look like Hollywood typecast of the rapist. They look like and are in many ways ordinary guys. Therefore, targeted populations cannot take comfort in the false hope that they are safe with someone just because they know them, or in the thought that they can tell a rapist from afar by the way they look. Rapists do, however, differ from other men in one significant way. They generally hold detrimental beliefs about their victims. Let me say that again. Rapists do, however, differ from other men in one significant way. They generally hold detrimental beliefs about their victims, often about the overall place, air quotes place, of women in society and about what constitutes rape. Most rapists are males who buy into a hyper-masculine ideology, a series of rape myths, and sometimes religious ideologies that greatly increase the likelihood they will feel justified in violating others or will justify their own acts as not violation. In their minds, they are able to justify the social inequality of women or of children, and are encouraged to disrespect all things deemed feminine or innocent through teachings of male dominance and female submission. Quoting Jack Stratton, "Most rapists don't consider what they've done to be rape." Gender ideology is foundational to rape, belief systems about men and women and or children. Rape is not so much the psychopathy of the individual perpetrator, but the systemic sociopathy of a rape-prone society in which masculinity is constructed as oppositional to all things, air quotes, feminine or empathetic, and in which male violence is made to appear normative. Rape is so commonplace in our society that women are many times more likely to be raped here in the United States than in many other societies. In fact, the United States has the highest incidence of rape among all Western societies. Rape is so common in the United States that many researchers and clinicians view rape more as a product of the socialization process that occurs within the fabric of our society than as a product of the individual rapist pathology. Not all societies are rape prone. Rather, there are societies that are virtually rape-free. In rape-free cultures, the relations between the sexes are constructed differently than in rape-prone cultures. An anthropological comparison of rape in 95 cultures indicates that the frequency of rape in a given society is influenced by the nature of the relations between the sexes, the status of women, and the attitudes that boys acquire during their developmental years. Rape-prone cultures are stratified socially and economically by gender. They glorify violence as manly, air quotes, and encourage boys to be aggressive. In rape-prone cultures, men have greater economic and political power, remaining aloof from women's work such as child-rearing and household duties. In rape-free societies, the sexes share power and authority and contribute equally to the community's welfare. Also, in rape-free societies, both sexes are raised to value nurturance and to avoid aggression and violence. And if you buy the book, there are footnotes taking you to the scholars that I am citing for these thoughts. For rape to occur, the rapist must lack identification with the victim. Rapists often come from or belong to all male social groups that are disrespectful of women. This sets up the ideological underpinning of rape, viewing women as being different from and less valued than men. This quotation is from Christopher Kilmartin. I challenge you to tell me one way in which the sexes are opposite. Calling men and women opposite is like calling an IBM computer the opposite of an Apple. And battle of the sexes implies that men and women are at war. We will never solve this problem until we work together and emphasize our commonalities rather than our differences. I see research studies reported in the popular press. A recent study proves that what we have suspected all along, that men's and women's brains are different. And what they do find is some infinitesimally small portion of the brain that has some minor difference that accounts for 5% of the variance in a population with wide variability, completely ignoring the fact that men and women's brains both have frontal cortexes, amygdalas, thalamuses, hypothalamuses, and on and on. And at the end of the story, the anchorman on the news says, well, that explains why I can't understand my wife at all. If you can't understand your wife, I recommend the much overlooked method of listening to her. That was Christopher Kilmartin. In rape affirming, all male peer groups, women are seen as simply here for men's pleasure, and the men in these groups bond around a shared masculinity in which they don't deal with women as human beings, but instead see them as lower status others. This distancing allows them to justify mistreating women, including treating them with violence. So while not mentally ill, the rapist is highly likely to be influenced by a woman demeaning all male peer group or social setting in which women are constructed as enemies. Such all-male enclaves implicitly and subtly create an atmosphere that condones violence against women, validates demeaning jokes, or even calling women by animal names or by the names of their genitals. There may be an unconscious, implicit conspiracy to keep women in their place by causing them to feel perpetually fearful of being physically attacked. In such settings, men rarely confront each other for fear of being attacked or ostracized. Yet research indicates that 75% of college men are uncomfortable when their male peers display these kinds of attacks and attitudes. Most men don't like demeaning women, and that men need to let other men know when they don't like that. Quotation here again from Christopher Kilmartin. Along with changing our attitudes toward women, we've got to change our attitudes toward ourselves. Boys will be boys not only provides a measure of excuse for violence against women, it is a very disrespectful attitude toward men, as if we are animals with absolutely no control over ourselves. There's an irony here. Self-control is another hallmark of traditional masculinity, but aggression and sexuality are considered to be completely out of control. I want men to have more dignity than that, he writes. It's a sad state of affairs when so many men have behaved so irresponsibly that the rest of us have to carry the burden of understandable suspicion from women. So besides becoming more respectful toward women, we have to regain our self-respect. We are human beings who are capable of caring for others. We are not animals who lash out instinctively, poisoned by testosterone. Violence against women is a men's issue, and men have to take a leadership role in building a more positive male community. And I'm about to read a poem I've written called Tears. You roll off, and they roll out, silent, unnoticed, down my cheeks. So strange, this aloneness within another's arms, this sense of being service uncommuned. Section 4, page 50, the victim. The victim of the rapist can be anyone, any child, any early teen, any woman of any age, or any degree of compliance or non-compliance with the media standard of beauty, or, in various circumstances, any male. Yet adult victims are overwhelmingly female. 90 to 95% of adult victims are female, and about 1/4 of all women in the United States can expect to be raped in their lifetime, and the rate is increasing. In many years of pastoral counseling, personal experience has led me to suspect that if we were to include all types of sexual assault in the counts, instead of finding that 1 out of 4 women have been raped, we would find that as many as 3 out of 4 women have been molested or sexually assaulted, either as children, as adolescents, and/or as adults. Males also frequently relate sexual abuse experiences, though generally they were children or early adolescents at the time they were assaulted. And again, law enforcement was unlikely to have been called in, even if the child or adolescent told parents or other authorities. Cultural myths, section 5. It is widely believed that 1, only women get raped, and 2, that only certain types of women get raped, and that 3, those types of women only get raped when they are involved in certain foolish activities like picking up strangers at bars or flirting while wearing miniskirts alone late on a dark night. We have already noted that while women are the predominant victims of rape, men and certainly children also suffer rape. It is a myth that only certain types of women are vulnerable to rape. Further, any woman can be the victim of rape no matter what type, air quotes, type of woman she is. While the primary victims of rape are young women, unfortunately, it is not uncommon for even very old women to be raped. And it is not valid to separate women into types. Seeing women as either Madonnas or whores is sexist, misogynistic, and downright erroneous. Sexually and in every other way, women are as complex and complicated as men. Women are, after all, also human beings. Women get raped in all walks of life. Virgins get raped. Mothers get raped. Sisters get raped. Grandmothers get raped. Women enclosed in protective cloisters or harems get raped. And on ad infinitum. Women do not only get raped while engaging in risky activities like drinking in bars or going to parties. And most of the time that women get raped, they get raped by men they know, who have access to them in all sorts of locations, times, and situations. Women get raped in their homes, sleeping in their beds. Women get raped in the course of their work or school life. Women get raped in nursing homes. Infant girls and boys get raped in their cradles. It is a myth that women who get raped are asking for it. When, as women, we dress sexy, we are more likely to be doing so for the sake of other women, of being thought well-dressed by other women, as to be found enticing by men. As women in a consumption-dominated culture like men, we internalize the societal images of what constitutes looking good, Attempting to be well-dressed, whatever that means for our age, peers, and momentary mental state, is not about asking to be violated by a male we don't want. After all, when we want someone and give clear consent, the sex is not rape. It is a myth that that a woman can't be raped if she doesn't want to be. Rape is an opportunistic crime, and rapists are opportunists, generally watching, calculating, and choosing the time and place of attack. So the element of surprise is often on their side. Along with physical force, rapists may also use weapons to coerce compliance. Both strangers and acquaintance rapists may use fear and intimidation, verbal and emotional manipulation, and the threat of physical force to gain an advantage and dominate the victim. The fact is that even without the use of physical or emotional weapons, many women do not have the physical strength to resist many men. At puberty, as one of the male secondary sex characteristics, men tend to get greater upper body strength. It is also a fact that we further exaggerate that upper body strength differential by dating and partnering according to size, with heterosexual women socialized to be attracted to larger, taller men, and heterosexual men socialized to be attracted to smaller, shorter women. In addition, few women pursue physical strength training in adolescence or young adulthood, and women are socialized to be compliant and submissive, even as men are socialized to be persistent and aggressive. It is a myth that women want to be raped. No woman wants to be raped. The fact that some women have rape fantasies is sometimes used to support the idea that women want to be sexually assaulted. However, it is important to understand the distinction between an erotic fantasy and a conscious desire to be harmed. In a fantasy, a person remains in control. A fantasy carries no threat of physical harm or death. A rape does. Women who say no do not mean yes. In the BDSM or bondage domination sadomasochistic community, partners who want to participate in role play games and pretend to be forced make an agreement ahead of time to enter a scenario, and they set up an agreed upon code word that means stop. Unless your partner and you have pre-discussed such a scenario, no means no. Legally and ethically and in reality, women and others who say no mean no. It is a myth that victims tempt, tease, or entice their assailants. Many rapists blame the victim, saying the victim tempted them. Often, even perpetrators against very young children will claim that the child came onto, or seduced, or teased them. Rapists may view their acts as just sex play. In interviews of college-aged males about acts that meet the legal definition of rape, many men responded with the question, why doesn't she just relax and enjoy it? It's just sex. In one study of 114 imprisoned rapists, over 80% did not see themselves as rapists. You need to understand how difficult it is to become an imprisoned rapist. There's a really high bar for proving, and it's usually a stranger rapist, and it usually involves some weaponry, right? So, but over 80% of 114 interviewed imprisoned rapists didn't see themselves as rapists. They used a variety of explanations to justify their actions, including claiming that women say no when they mean yes, that women are seducers who lead you on, and that most women eventually relax and enjoy it. Since rape is an overwhelmingly under-prosecuted and under-punished crime, the very fact that these men were convicted and imprisoned for rape is strong evidence that they were quite wrong. Christopher Kilmartin again. If I get out of control, how does that work? Physiologically, prostate exerts pressure on the spinal cord, cutting off oxygen to the brain. And this next part. Okay, yeah. Every man is a human being, capable of caring for others, not an animal poisoned by testosterone. And that is also a Kilmartin quote. No child, no girl, no woman, no boy or man has so tempted a rapist that the rapist lost all control and couldn't help himself. To rape or not to rape, it is always a choice. It is a myth that women cry rape falsely. On page 56. Another myth about rape is that the victim cries rape falsely. While not impossible, There is such a cost in our culture to reporting rape that crying rape falsely is generally highly unlikely. False accusations of rape are quite uncommon, and they are even less frequently carried as far as prosecution. Given the difficulties that exist in reporting and prosecuting the rape, even were someone with a vendetta who desires to besmirch the character of an enemy to report rape falsely, few women or men could successfully proceed with an untrue rape case. The much more likely and common scenario is that female and male, adult and child victims suffer rape victimization and do not report the crime to any authorities. Reporting is further complicated when no physical bruises or wounds are immediately apparent, or the rapist was an acquaintance. In such situations, many victims, survivors blame themselves, or if they have the presence of mind to properly assign fault to the perpetrator, find themselves disbelieved or labeled as unfounded by the legal system. And the legal systematic use of the word unfounded does not mean proven untrue. Unfounded means that the DA has decided that they can't win in court, that there's the evidence that they have won't establish what they need for this very high bar of prosecution. That we'll go there some other time. The whole he said, she said thing. Justifying the perpetrator while blaming the victim. Our cultural rape myths both justify and forgive the perpetrator while blaming and holding the victim to account. The female victim is blamed for her morals, dress, poor judgment, and/or social activity. Since even little boys must be men, and men must at all times be invulnerable and inviolate, the male victim, when he is acknowledged at all, is blamed, no matter his age or size, for his failure to successfully resist. Let me say that again. Since even little boys must be men, and men must at all times be both invulnerable and inviolate, the male victim, when he is acknowledged at all, is blamed, no matter his age or size, for his failure to successfully resist. In other words, girls and women are called liars and disbelieved, but generally little boys and men are asked why they didn't fight him off, and expected to be able to, no matter how young they are. Even child victims are quickly blamed, questioned about their truthfulness, their level of resistance as demonstrated by their failure to get away, and their speed of report or waiting to tell. Along with these rape myths, other societal attitudes, attitudinal dinosaurs left over from an era in which women and children were legally property, hinder much needed change. Where women are still viewed as legitimate prey for the male hunter, and males are encouraged to exalt violence and to persist until they win either the relationship with the good girl or the one-night stand with the loose girl, young men often report sexual activity that they believe to be legitimate that meets the definition of rape. Meanwhile, the sexual double standard that gives kudos to a man who scores sexually but labels women who are freely sexual in negative ways is still firmly in place. Slut bashing of females and harassment of males who do not womanize often begins in middle school. This double standard persists in many locations throughout the college years. In undergraduate classes, I am routinely told that there are two kinds of girls, the kind you bring home to family and marry, and the kind you use for an evening or a few sexual escapades and then discard. Even within marriage, women who admit to having desires or who initiate sex based on those desires may be negatively labeled by their spouses. And certainly women of all ages, whether or not men are held to the same standard, must abide by the rules of monogamy or male ownership of their sexuality or suffer the social consequences. Christopher Kilmartin, in the case of rape, it can be argued that the victims were not having sex. The perpetrators were not either.